Our current national debt, the publicly held debt that government has borrowed in markets, is over $30 trillion. So the Social Security unfunded obligation alone at $28 trillion is almost as large as the entire publicly held debt.
Hello, welcome again to another episode of the Let People Prosper show. My name is Dr. Vance Ginn. I hope you're having a prosperous day. Well, today I'm delighted to bring someone on who knows a lot about the federal budget, knows a lot about freedom and liberty and a lot more, and it's none other than Romina Boccia. Romina, welcome to the Let People Prosper show.
Thanks, Vance. It's good to be on. Vance, sorry.
Yeah, no, you're good.
It's been a rough week, government shutdown.
Yeah, it has. With the shutdowns and everything else going on, I don't know how you're probably not sleeping.
Not much. Yeah, not much.
Well, we got a lot to talk about. But before we get into it, let me go ahead and read your bio for the audience, and then we'll jump right into it. So today's guest is Romina Boccia, one of the sharpest minds in fiscal policy. She's the director of budget and entitlement policy at the Cato Institute in Washington, D.C., where she leads research on federal spending, budget process, and the economic dangers of rising debt. She's the principal author of her Substack newsletter, Debt Dispatch, which I'll put in the show notes page, the #1 fiscal newsletter read by members of Congress, and her work has shaped major reform efforts on Social Security, Medicare, and budget rules. I first met Romina during my time at the White House when she was leading the Grover M. Herman Center for the Federal Budget at Heritage Foundation, but I've been a fan of her work ever since. She's now bringing that same fire to Cato in her new book. This is the new book, Reimagining Social Security, Global Lessons for Retirement Policy Changes. I'm thrilled to have her on the Let People Prosper show. So with all that great background and stuff going on, Romina, let me go ahead and ask you the first question I do all the guests. Why do you do what you do every day?
Because I care about people being able to prosper. And, I got into economics because I wanted to understand, particularly in my personal circumstances, why it was that my family that lived in Germany was having such higher living standards than my family that lived in southern Italy. My grandfather immigrated from Italy to Germany. I was born and raised in Germany before I came to the United States. And it was this question of going down to Italy for summer vacation and being like, gosh, they don't even have paved roads. They have really low living standards. They're kind of poor. There's a lot of stray cats and dogs running around. It felt like a third world country compared to Germany where I grew up. And so it's what explains those differences? These are the same people, right? Some of them moved to Germany. The rest stayed in southern Italy. The ones who moved are doing way better than the ones who stayed. What explains those differences? And I wanted to understand that. Why do some countries prosper and some regions prosper and others fall behind? And the impact that has on people. And then myself, I've chosen to live in the United States, which is far more prosperous than Germany. I can see why many people are drawn to the United States. I think the American dream is still alive and well, although government policy is doing its best to crush it, unfortunately. So I want to keep that dream alive for other people like myself.
Yeah, no, I love it. From growing up in Germany and eventually earning your degrees in economics at George Mason University, and doing what you do now, being a leading voice in fiscal policy, I know that you looked at Italy versus Germany and other things, but what else got you into the fiscal policy space? Because you could have went in a lot of different directions with that. What really got you looking at entitlement reform and fiscal policy?
That was more of an accident because when I first started off, I was looking at education policy, thinking about, education is sort of the key to individual prosperity. But you also find yourself, there's things you can do to prepare yourself to live a prosperous life. But if you're in the wrong environment, you can be the most educated person and still not succeed. After that, I got into energy policy. Energy is a huge driver of prosperity. There's a big correlation between energy consumption and GDP growth. So this is one of the clearest alignments. And it's actually been one of the issues that Germany has had, that they've cut off their energy supply. They decided to shut down their very safe nuclear power plants because they got a scare. What happened in Fukushima in Japan, even though they had absolutely no relevance to Germany. And decided to go all in on the green energy revolution with solar subsidies. And it's kind of interesting because the sun doesn't shine that much in Germany. The coldest August of my life I've spent in Germany. You're wearing sweaters and jackets, and it's raining all the time. So it's kind of a bad bet. But I ended up in fiscal policy because, you have to also seize the opportunities before you. And as you mentioned, I was at the Heritage Foundation prior. Brian, now Jessica Riedel, was the spending fellow at Heritage at the time when I joined, and then went to work for Senator Portman. This is not uncommon that folks go from think tanks to Capitol Hill or vice versa. And that created an opportunity for someone who cared about prosperity and economic growth, and had some ability to work with numbers. That's sometimes difficult to find. So it's just an opportunity that I stepped into, and then just found that debt, spending, entitlement programs, you really need someone who's willing to speak unpopular truths. Yeah. Because the key drivers of our debt are programs that are very popular with an increasingly powerful constituency, older Americans. Being able to say the way things are, it's good to have a German, I think, at the helm, because we don't bite our tongues. We're very direct, and we don't shy away from being honest, even when the truth hurts.
Yeah. Well, we need more of that truth, Romina. We really do. And I wonder, how was your transition, though, coming from Germany to the United States? There's all this talk right now about immigration, and we need more restrictions and all the other stuff that's going on today. But how was your experience with that?
It was very tricky. Okay. It's extremely difficult to immigrate to the United States, even when you're trying to follow the rules. I remember my first work permit supposedly got lost, or I was told that they always get stolen. And I'm like, then why do you send them regular mail if they always get stolen? But there were a lot of issues. Really, like, interacting with the immigration agency at the time was probably one of the worst experiences of my life, because you just felt like they weren't being dishonest, and you had no power. Your life, whether you got to stay or had to leave, was in their hands, and a lot of it seemed very arbitrary. So it really shaped my outlook, and I think furthered my conviction that I was libertarian. The legal immigration system is incredibly complex, and even people who are trying to follow the rules, it's very difficult to actually do so. We do need immigration reform, because I do believe that immigrants are a boon to our country, and we want more legal immigration, people who come here to work, to be part of the American dream, and there's immense assimilation by immigrants in the United States. My colleague, Alex Norashte at the Cato Institute, has written extensively on this.
A former guest on the show. Oh, yeah, he's great. He's fantastic and everything too. That's for sure. I wonder, looking at some of the other issues that are going on out there right now. We're in the middle of a federal government shutdown, started October 1st, and you've been really busy looking at those sort of things and everything else. But you were at Heritage for a while, then you did your own thing for a while, and then you're now at Cato. Have any of these things changed in your mind about the fiscal situation that we're in, or where we're heading? And how might people out there in the public think about the federal spending crisis and the shutdown and everything else that we have going on right now?
Well, things have just gotten a lot worse since. Yeah, I don't want to say I'm responsible, but since I joined fiscal policy, things have gotten a lot worse. Yeah. We were worried about debt when it was 60% of GDP. Now it's 100% of GDP, our publicly held debt, and it's rising. It's rising rapidly. We have deficits that are $2 trillion annually, going to $3 trillion before the end of the decade. So things have just gotten that much worse, and to a large degree is because our warnings were not heeded. We warned that the big baby boomer retirement wave was coming, and that our entitlement programs, especially Medicare and Social Security, were not set up to handle that huge wave of retirees. They weren't properly pre-funded. And the burdens on current younger workers were going to have to rise significantly in order to cover those promises unless we changed them in some way. And, changing those promises, I think, made the most sense, especially because both Medicare and Social Security are becoming more generous in real terms with every successive cohort. They're designed to grow faster than the economy, faster than inflation. Social Security's initial benefits are indexed to wage growth in the economy. So as the economy grows, wages go up, people's Social Security benefits become more generous. It doesn't reflect what they paid in taxes or what they earned, but that's how Congress designed the program. So you can't grow your way out of that problem. Medicare has shown to grow faster than the economy steadily. Some of it is more people enrolling in Medicare because of the aging of the population, but it's also Medicare covering more and more treatments, Medicare getting expanded, especially with the prescription drug benefit that has become increasingly costly over time, and overall just the government taking over more and more of the U.S. healthcare sector and crowding out market forces that's driving up costs with Obamacare subsidies. This shutdown is over so-called enhanced Obamacare COVID credits that were supposedly a temporary policy that Democrats instituted with no Republican support, and now they're asking Republicans to own extending those subsidies, which have driven up healthcare costs, which have driven up fraud in Obamacare enrollments, primarily benefiting health insurance companies, not even the providers, not the patients, and would add $400 billion to our debt over the next decade, with Democrats having made no plans for how to pay for it, and they basically want Republicans to own it. So Republicans are rightfully saying, no thanks. This was your policy. You had the option of making that permanent.
Right.
The Democrats, you decided not to, and now you want us to own it. Like, no, this is yours. We have nothing to do with that. I kind of get the Republican position in this government shutdown.
Yeah.
They've offered a clean continuing resolution. It's very simple. Actually, I found that to be surprising. It's kind of a gimme. If you ask me, the Democrats, to say, hey, we'll lock in Biden-era spending levels. We're not even going to try and cut spending. Here you are. Here's your clean bill. And then the Democrats go, no, we want an additional $1.5 trillion in healthcare spending that's driving up costs and making healthcare more expensive for every American, crowding out private sector healthcare. The number of people that are turning down employer-provided coverage because they can get a better deal on the Obamacare exchanges, that's troubling. You are literally crowding out private sector healthcare because the government is offering a deal that the private sector cannot match. And that was always the plan of those people who think we should have nationalized single-payer healthcare. This is how you get there. You make the government plan a direct substitute, and you use taxpayer money to subsidize those government plans such that people opt out of private plans and go on the government exchanges, and boom, here's your justification for continuously expanding federal healthcare spending or government healthcare spending until you have a mostly nationalized system. I think this is the wrong path, and so I'm glad that so far Republicans have been holding the line on those demands.
Yeah. We'll see. And great points there, Romina. I think, when you look historically, we're at $37 trillion in our national debt. And if you look at what's happened over time, this is a bipartisan problem in the sense that Republicans and Democrats have contributed to us being to where we're at today, whether you look at Congress or presidents or anything else. Even in the first Trump administration, the last budget that I helped write with Russ Vought in those, we found $4.6 trillion in savings. Of course, that means in D.C. talk, you're just spending less than you otherwise would. The budget doesn't go down. I was pissed about that, but whatever. We were trying to do some good. But then COVID and everything else, and of course, the president really didn't care about spending. So, we could come up with what we wanted to do. And then you had Mnuchin and them go and negotiate these worse deals with Pelosi. And it just seems like maybe we're in a place now where Republicans will start to build a backbone and push more spending restraint. I know that you've also been a fan of fiscal rules, as am I, of trying to limit how much they're spending and things of that nature. But do you see maybe this is this time different, I guess is the question. Might we see Republicans start to go in a direction of less spending? I'm not too hopeful, but I wonder what you're thinking, Romina.
The biggest worry with extension of the Trump tax cuts, which occurred in July as part of the OBBBA, the reconciliation bill, was that Republicans were just going to extend the tax cuts, maybe expand the tax cuts, and not do any spending reductions. So at least they did some reductions in Medicaid, some reductions in food stamps. Unfortunately, none of those reductions are actually taking place yet. They delayed the implementation of those savings until after the midterms, which sadly creates exactly this opportunity that we're witnessing now for Democrats to try to turn those savings off. One of the demands that Democrats have made in funding the government, ending the shutdown, is that they want Republicans to reverse the modest Medicaid savings that were enacted in July, many of which get at problems of fraud, many of which get at problems of able-bodied individuals that are actually crowding out healthcare access for traditional Medicaid populations. Think pregnant women, individuals with disabilities, individuals who are poor and unable to work, that are supposed to be the beneficiaries of Medicaid. The Obamacare Medicaid expansion has significantly contributed to those folks that need those Medicaid benefits the most, basically waiting in long lines to get access to care, because just having the government provide you with health insurance doesn't mean you can actually get the care that you need. And so Republicans were trying to address some of those issues with very modest Medicaid savings in the reconciliation bill. So those are reforms that we could build on. There's some willingness to start, especially tamping down on fraud and abuse, making sure that benefits are more targeted towards those individuals that are supposed to be benefiting. But delaying the implementation of those savings, of course, unfortunately creates those cliffs that then the other political party can exploit in an attempt to turn those savings off before they even take place. That's, that was something we lamented. It was the tax cuts now, spending cuts maybe later. It's this sort of like dessert before eating your spinach. Will the spinach ever come? And so we'll have to watch what happens there. We'll have to try and make sure those savings actually take place. But until then, we're going to repeatedly see calls to have those savings turned off. So good on them for including some spending reductions, but they were far too small. Tiny little down payment. We should double down on those and definitely avoid turning them off.
Yeah. And right now it's good on them for the Republicans to stand their ground. Hopefully they will continue to. We're recording this on October 7th, so we'll see how long this shutdown goes on that started October 1st. But these are key issues. I mean, when you look at the total budget of about $7 trillion, when you look at Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, you're talking about 3/4 of the entire budget. You add in defense, you're closer to 80% or so. So these are massive amounts of the overall budget. And it's one of the key things that you've always been great about talking about, Romina, is staying steadfast on those, because I know that in D.C., there's a lot of folks, including at the White House, who will say, well, we can't touch entitlements. Trump has said we're not going to touch these, so we can't. And even the first administration, it was always, well, we got to work on the discretionary spending. If we can't get our own fiscal house in order, being, the government, executive branch, and everything else, how can we ask senior citizens and others and the poor to not have those benefits as well? But if we don't touch these quote unquote entitlements, which I don't think we're entitled to anything, but these entitlements, we really aren't going to put a dent in the fiscal trajectory, which is going off of a cliff into the future. And that's what's so great about your book and the work that you're doing now on reimagining Social Security. And I wanted to dive into that now, Romina, because this is a big thing and it's politically unpopular in a lot of ways. But if we don't get something done soon, we're going to have major other problems, including the debt, on our hands. So where do you like to start with this, and how can we see this maybe moving forward of actually reimagining some key reforms to Social Security?
Yeah, I mean, you have some deadlines. Congress loves deadlines. Otherwise, they don't move a finger, right? You have to really be up against a deadline. And so with Social Security, it looks like the so-called trust fund, which again is no such thing, but it does set up a legislative deadline, is supposed to be depleted by 2032. That's less than 7 years from now. So that creates a mechanism to force reforms. The last time we were in this place was in 1983. So there haven't been reforms to Social Security, any major reforms, in over 40 years. That's one of the problems, is that our population has aged, so our demographics have changed. The share of the population 65 and older is rising from about 15% of the population in roughly 2010 to now 17, 18% and going up to 22% of the population. And so that's where you have the retirement of the baby boomers drawing down from these programs, which were never designed in a way to support multi-decade-long retirements. Social Security, when it was first enacted, was intended to benefit those people who outlived everybody else. The eligibility age for Social Security, when it was set at 65 in 1935, was actually a year higher than average life expectancy. Most people didn't live that long. So that's obviously very different, where now the full retirement age is 67 and people live well into their 80s. So you have a very different program that obviously you cannot finance with the small payroll taxes that were put in place back then. And so payroll taxes have gone up and up and up and up. And so it's really been the problem now we have is that we are transferring increasing amounts of money from working age Americans who on average are much poorer, have much lower net worths than the population that's benefiting from those transfers. Seniors, America's seniors, especially the baby boomer generation, is the wealthiest generation on earth. And we're transferring increasing amounts of money to them. How much? Over 40 cents on the dollar that the federal government spends in a given year. Over 40 cents on the dollar that the government spends benefits people 65 and older through Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid. And unfortunately, as much as we hear rhetoric about earned benefits and how people paid into these programs, they're not getting the money back that they paid in. That money is long gone. It is a pay-as-you-go transfer program. When people pay taxes, those taxes immediately go to pay for benefits for people who are on the receiving side of the ledger. There's no saving that takes place. The trust funds are intergovernmental accounting mechanisms. They're literally IOUs. They're not even government bonds that are marketable. And so let's stop pretending that people somehow paid for the benefits. They paid for the benefits of the generations that retired before them. And now they're the beneficiaries of taxes paid by current working Americans. That's what's really going on. So keeping that in mind, understanding where that money is actually coming from, and then looking at the shortfalls that both Medicare and Social Security are facing, you cannot come to any other conclusion, but we need to reform these programs. There's a report that the Treasury puts out that gets very little attention because it's a long-term report. They look at the next 75 years and our unfunded obligations. Everyone talks about the CBO report, primarily that one that looks 10 years out. But the financial report of the United States government, the Treasury puts out, shows in no uncertain terms that more than 100% of our entire unfunded obligation is due to Medicare and Social Security. And 2/3 of the problem is Medicare, 1/3 is Social Security. A lot of the same reforms that I think we need to look at with Social Security also apply to Medicare. But Social Security is something people can wrap their heads around more easily. So the book is about Social Security, but there's a lot of reforms that would also be could be applicable to how we look at Medicare. And the big issue really is to think about, what is this social contract that we're living under? And would anybody behind the so-called veil of ignorance, if you're familiar with Rawls' concept that when you make policy, you should not be thinking about, are you going to be a beneficiary of that policy, or are you going to be a payee? But if you don't know who you're going to be, what is the most fair, what is the most just outcome across generations and across different groups of people? And the social contract we're living under right now is absolutely nothing anyone behind the veil of ignorance would agree to, because it's not fair. It's not just. We have a Robin Hood principle in reverse. We are transferring income from poorer working Americans towards older, wealthier generations who are retired. It's not needs-based. It's not affordable. It's unsustainable. And so the whole thing just doesn't make any sense, which is why the systems are projected to collapse.
Yeah.
The problem is, when they collapse, they might take the rest of the economy down with them. And so that's why we need to reform them and really be thinking about what is the goal of these programs? How can we meet those goals without sinking the U.S. economy for the rest of us?
Yeah, no, wise words there. And when we hit 2032, it doesn't mean that they won't get any payments, right? Like the Social Security recipients. It just means that they'll receive less than what they're expecting. Is that right?
Yeah, so under current law, everyone will get roughly a quarter haircut. It's between 23 and 25% total benefit cut across the board. Now, there's no politician that's going to allow that to take place. And the longer we wait to make more targeted reforms to slow the growth in benefits in those programs, the more likely politicians are going to institute a massive tax increase by 2032, coupled with likely trillions in additional borrowing that will further drive up interest rates and could potentially precipitate a bond market crisis.
Yeah, exactly. And so these are all things that we should be trying to avoid now. To your point, let's not wait till the crisis, right? Let's try to start making changes now. So what are some of those things that they should be looking at as options? Is it raising the retirement age? Is it looking at ability to pay? Or what are some of the key things that you like to look at, Romina, with reimagining Social Security?
Yeah, so there's the common tweaks that people have talked about, like raising the retirement age. Yes, of course, we should be doing that.
Yeah.
But we really look at broader changes. Like, what will be a structural redesign? Like, if you started from scratch, the fact that Social Security is 90 years old, should we really be trying to save and preserve a program in its current form that absolutely no longer reflects our times?
Yeah.
Like, things have changed. The program should change. And so that's why we call it reimagining Social Security. Like, we're not talking about saving the program, preserving the program. We're saying, let's think about, what do we want this program to accomplish? What can we afford, given our economic and demographic realities? And then how do we get there? And so Social Security should provide a floor against poverty, a basic insurance for everyone to know that this is how much I can expect to receive from the program, and now I can plan how much I need to save on my own in an account that I own and control by starting a business and growing it, whatever it is that people want to do, having more kids that perhaps will take care of me in my old age. Like, there's lots of variants for how people can provide for themselves in the future. But if you know what you can expect, then you can plan. The problem with the current Social Security formula, it's so complex. Most people have absolutely no idea what they can expect from Social Security, and so they can't properly plan. So transitioning towards a predictable, flat benefit would be, I think, one of the best reforms we could make. And the UK has done this. So there's an example here where the UK moved from an earnings earnings-related system, which is what ours is, with a highly complex formula, to now transitioning towards a flat, predictable benefit supplemented by private savings. The good news is the United States is one of the most successful private retirement savings systems in the world. The assets in 401ks and IRAs and other private retirement accounts in the U.S. exceed our GDP, exceed the size of the entire economy. Americans are very good at saving for retirement in these accounts that they own, control, and that are invested in the market so that Americans can benefit from the growth in our economy. And we should be more reliant on those private accounts and less reliant on this government Ponzi scheme because it's also more sustainable, right? When you actually create real savings in these private accounts, you are also providing capital for private markets to invest and grow the economy, and then people benefit from that down the road. Whereas Social Security is just an income transfer system. There's no saving, no investment, no capital formation. So that's one of the issues with the government transfer program. But what government does best is actually transferring income. They're really good at taking income from people and giving it to other people. And so we can lean into that and say, let's use that blunt mechanism only to the extent necessary to protect people from destitution and otherwise empower people to save in ways that make the most sense for them. So Sweden has also started. Sweden, a lot of people think socialist paradise. Well, they reformed their old age pension program and they carved out private accounts so that individuals would be less reliant on the government, and they've already seen the benefits. The private accounts are growing in size, and so the importance of the government transfer system is reducing, is shrinking, because you don't need the government to transfer as much income to people in retirement if they have financial security that they were able to build through their own savings. And so that's a direction we want to move in. That means transitioning towards a more flat, predictable benefit, moving away from this earnings-related system, and then over the long term, also reducing the tax burden on Americans that payroll taxes impose. Payroll taxes are highly regressive. They make it more difficult for lower-income Americans to get hired, because it's one of the tax burdens they actually face and that their employer also contributes to. And so I think raising payroll taxes should be off the table. Eliminating the payroll tax threshold should also be off the table. It'd be a huge marginal tax increase for small businesses, for many innovators in the United States. People in California, if that tax change were to take place, would face marginal tax rates above 60%.
Wow.
That's definitely going to cause behavioral changes. So those are some things to consider. There aren't any silver bullet solutions of just raise this tax the rich. Like, you actually have to structurally change the program. And then also, the fact that we rely on Congress every 40 years when there's some crisis to make some kind of tweak, that's also outdated. Most of the countries in our book have adopted automatic stabilization mechanisms, basically recognizing that the politics of reforming entitlements are so difficult. You need to design your retirement programs in a way that they're self-sustaining without requiring difficult political changes. You index them automatically, for example, to increase in life expectancy. Rather than asking Congress to vote on increasing the retirement age, which is politically unpopular, you build that in. You say, you know what? This should be for people who can no longer work. So if life expectancy and health span are improving, that means people can work longer. And so we're automatically going to increase the eligibility age with those improvements in health and longevity. And that's a change that many of the countries in our book have adopted. Similarly, if you rely on a pay-as-you-go program where you're highly dependent on your younger working population to finance benefits for your older retired population, you might want to structure those benefits in a way that the younger population can actually afford to pay them. And so as you have a demographic shift, if you end up with more older people on the receiving end and fewer people paying in, which is a change that we're experiencing in the U.S. We've gone from 16 people paying for every one retiree down to 2.7, and we're going down to below 2. Like, you need to adjust those parameters. And so a lot of these programs basically say we're going to distribute the burden. If the number of people paying into these programs is shrinking and the number of people collecting is rising, one of the things we're going to do is we're going to reduce the growth in benefits for that elderly population to avoid just automatic ratcheting tax increases for the younger population. And so to align those things a little bit better. So that's another change we could look at. So basically automating a lot of the adjustments that need to be made. So it's not Congress doing it every 40 years in the midst of a crisis. And also adopting a benefit that's predictable so that people can make better decisions about how much to save and be less reliant on the government in the long term.
Yeah, no, that's great. And I guess that's moving more from a defined benefit sort of model to defined contribution.
It is, but it's different from what President Bush recommended in the early 2000s, which was a great change then. At the time, they talked about taking a portion of payroll taxes and allowing people to invest it in accounts that they owned and controlled. At the time that Bush was recommending that, we had surpluses. It was actually money to invest. Now, and ever since 2010, we've actually had cash flow deficits. Social Security is already actively contributing to our deficit and debt. So taking any portion of payroll taxes now and for people to, use that in private accounts will basically just make the already massive shortfall bigger. And how big is the shortfall? Under the current policy where people pay 12.6% of their earnings up until a threshold into Social Security with the current benefit structure, we have a $28 trillion long-term shortfall in Social Security in net present value terms. That's the amount you would need to invest today in Treasury bonds in order to be able to cover that obligation without benefit cuts or tax increases. Obviously, we don't have that money. By the way, our current national debt, the publicly held debt that government has borrowed in markets, is over $30 trillion. So the Social Security unfunded obligation alone at $28 trillion is almost as large as the entire publicly held debt.
Wow. Yeah. It's hard to fathom, how we've gotten here. And I think you made a great point earlier, Romina, about this was 90 years ago, right? In 1935 was when the Social Security Act was put in place, and it was during the Great Depression. So, there was a lot of different things that were going on. We had these huge expansions of government, and maybe you could argue that there was a need for it at that time for older people. But this is a whole different economy. This is a whole different group of people that are out there today. And your other point was really good too about the crowding out effect. I've also thought about that over time, is how much have we crowded out the private sector savings by putting so much not even putting it, but forcing people to put into this Social Security system that's now going bankrupt. Our economy could be much larger, to your point about returns in the private sector for stocks and things of that nature are usually in real terms, inflation-adjusted terms, substantially higher than what the bonds are and treasury bills that are usually put in Social Security, which I guess we don't have a lot of those now since they're already running deficits in that program. But there's just so much that I think we're missing out on. Thinking about the opportunity costs in the economics part of it, is the opportunity costs are just so huge that we only have what we see out there of Social Security and grandparents getting these checks now in the mail. But how much have we given up, right, during this entire time, and this dependency that we've created? I've also thought a lot about it would be nice to have more charitable contributions, more towards churches and synagogues and families being able to help at each other. A lot of talk right now, Romina, especially among some conservatives, is that we really need to strengthen the family. But these sort of programs, in my view, have weakened the family. It's made us more dependent on government and politicians through Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid. How are we going to strengthen the family when a lot of the policies that they seem to be choosing now are actually expanding government and I think making the situation worse? What do you think about some of those things?
No, you're right. I'm in full agreement with you. It's really awful the ways in which these government programs have crowded out, as you said, civil society, charity, family formation. It's interesting too. I saw a recent study that indicates that conservatives have bigger families than Democrats. Democrats seem to be opting not to have children in large parts, and that makes them also more vulnerable to needing these government benefit programs, right? If you don't have children that you can rely on to help take care of you in old age, you need the government to step in. And there is a strong indication that the programs like Social Security and Medicare have not only crowded out private savings, we know very much that that is the case, but that have also crowded out family formation and in many cases are leading to their own demise because they're structured in a way to rely on the next generation to be able to cover the promises that have been made to the older generation. But if people aren't having children and the workforce is shrinking in the future, then that makes that very difficult. It makes immigration also more important, but we seem to be intent on reducing the number of immigrants too. Immigrants have actually been quite a boon to Social Security. The Congressional Budget Office estimates that only about half of the immigrants that pay into programs like Social Security will ever become eligible to collect from those programs. So there's been a lot of revenue flowing into Social Security from immigrants that won't be able to collect on those taxes in the future, but that's changing now as well. I'm not saying we should be relying on immigrants for that. Sure. It just pushes the issue out, into the future, but it has been, has improved the Social Security finances for quite some time. But the real issue is that we've promised people benefits that are excessive for too long. And politicians have been thinking about how can we increase benefits for seniors. They did that again in the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, the reconciliation bill in July. They expanded the senior tax deduction in an attempt to eliminate taxes on Social Security benefits. Then in January, you had a bipartisan bill. Both Republicans and Democrats voted to eliminate the government pension offset and the so-called windfall elimination provision, providing huge benefits to public sector union workers, your state and local workers that didn't pay into Social Security for most of their lives, that maybe had 10 years, maybe 15 years after they retired from their government job, that are now getting huge windfalls from the program that were sent to Social Security Trust Fund. So we're still in the process of politicians bending over backwards to find ways to buy votes by increasing benefits for highly powerful political constituency. Individuals 65 and older are much more likely to vote in any given election. They're much more likely to call their members of Congress to make their voice heard. And politicians are catering to their interests, and the budget reflects that. With 40 cents of every dollar the government spends going towards benefiting individuals 65 and older, but it shortchanges the rest of us. And it is building a house of cards that will eventually collapse. And politicians, unfortunately, are so myopic that they can hardly think beyond the next election cycle, let alone a decade down the road, which is why fiscal rules are so important. And the countries that have managed to stabilize their finances, including many of the countries in our books, actually adopted like debt breaks. Sweden, Germany, Switzerland, they all have these counter-cyclical debt breaks that are more advanced, I would say, than a balanced budget amendment because they try to control for flow. They try to limit the size of deficits much better than our so-called debt limit, which has been completely ineffective at limiting the debt. It just gets waived or suspended basically as a regular occurrence now, and obviously hasn't limited the debt in any way. But there are ways to do that. These debt breaks are a very promising And there's a version of this that could also work in the United States, but you'd actually have to get lawmakers to restrain themselves. And they haven't shown any willingness to do so. And they may not show that willingness until a fiscal crisis forces their hands.
Yeah.
So part of what we do now is basically paving the way for when that crisis comes, the political opportunity, the window of opportunity opens up, that we have good reforms on the shelf, ready to go, that we've socialized in Congress and among the public so they stand a chance of being adopted.
Yeah. Romina, I could talk to you all day. There's so much that's going on and so many different things that you're working on that we could probably solve a lot of the problems right here. If politicians would just listen to us. Maybe they will at some point. And I really appreciate all the work you're doing, Romina. And I learn from you all the time, whether I was in the White House or now. I'm always reading your stuff. So keep up the great work. And thank you for being on the Let People Prosper show. And God bless you and your family. And I look forward to talking to you again soon.
Thanks so much, Vance. I really appreciate it. And thanks for highlighting the book on your show, Reimagining Social Security, available at the Cato Institute and on Amazon or wherever you get your books. And my Substack is still free. The Debt Dispatch on Substack, sign up. Members of Congress read it. So if you want to know what they're thinking about, you should too.
Yeah, exactly right. And I'll be sure to put that in the show notes page and everything else. So thank you so much, Romina. And for the audience, thank y'all for joining us today as well. Be sure to share this with your friends and family and colleagues and everyone else. They too need to figure out what's going on with our debt, with our spending, and reimagining Social Security. Go out and get a copy of this book. You don't want to miss it. There's so much good information in there, and I'll be sure to put that in the show notes as well. Remember, you can find more information at vanceginn.com or go to my Substack, vanceginn.substack.com, where you can find more information there as well. Until next time, God bless you and let people prosper.